Joshua Horwitz, we're talking about the War of the Whales, and we're at the Los Angeles Times Festival of Books. Welcome, first of all.
Thanks for having me.
Right at the top it says a true story. And as you read through it, and to see how much time you spent on it, and the story itself is almost too much to believe. It went on for a long time, not only for you as the writer, but for the people that were also investigating this and following this.
Well, my publisher insisted that that was the subtitle for the book because, as he said, if you don't call it a true story, people will assume it's a novel because it's one of these stranger than truth kind of stories. And that's what hooked me. I mean, I wasn't particularly interested or knowledgeable about whales or the Navy or the legal issues around it, but I got hooked on the story, which was just, you know, what every writer is looking for, which is a great untold story.
It's definitely, it hooked me too. Let's start with the first question. Who is Ken Balcomb?
So Ken Balcomb, who's one of the two protagonists in the book, is a guy who I always, when I was writing it, I sort of thought him as like the Clint Eastwood character in one of those westerns where he seems like a normal guy and then the bad guys come to town and he pulls out a chest from under his bed and there's his holster, and he's somebody who had a Navy past. He was as it turns out, a sonar operator, a sonar officer in the Navy during the Vietnam period, and then left that behind, became a whale researcher, and 25 years later those two worlds collide in the Bahamas, and he has to decide where his loyalties lie with his first love, which was the Navy, and he was very loyal to the Navy, or to the whales he's been studying for the last 20 years.
Well, let's talk about that incident in the Bahamas. So, mysteriously, a number of whales start beaching themselves, and Ken Balcomb is there, and he sees some things happening in that bay. Why don't you explain a little bit what he saw?
Well, he had been studying this, what's called a resident population, meaning they're not transient, they stay there, and they've been there for millions of years, and what's the deepest underwater canyon in the world. It's the Great Bahama Canyon, and it's 4 times as wide and deep as the Grand Canyon in the United States, but it's an underwater canyon. And there are this particular kind of whales called beaked whales, which are the deepest diving mammals in the world, and they can dive down to 1.5 miles, sometimes 2 miles. I mean, they're just incredible animals. They can stay underwater for an hour and a half, and so he had been studying them with his wife and research partner, Diane Claridge, for 10 years, and this species of whales never strands. Some, strandings are not uncommon, and some species normally strand alive. They get lost, they get confused, but beaked whales don't, because they never come close to shore. They're always in this canyon way out there, and so that day when they started coming ashore, he knew something had happened in the canyon, and that's sort of the mystery that sets up the whole story, and he's determined to solve it.
And at the same time, the U.S. Navy is experimenting with sonar in the same area, and Ken Balcomb knows this, or he suspects it at least at the time, strongly suspects. And so begins your narrative tale, which brings in Joel Reynolds and all these other people that really takes it to another level in terms of legal.
Yeah. Well, I entered the story through Joel Reynolds. I'd heard about the legal case, and I spent some time with Joel Reynolds, who runs the NRDC office here in Los Angeles, and he had been on this case for some time, and it was heading to the Supreme Court. The legal angle is historically significant, but it wasn't very interesting narratively, simply because it wasn't a murder trial, it was an administrative law. He was enforcing some environmental laws from the 1970s that the Navy had never observed, and so he was the guy who was standing up to the Navy in court. But when I figured out that what allowed him to go to court against the Navy was a physical evidence trail that this individual had collected, because there had been rumors of an association between Navy sonar, active sonar exercises, and whale strandings. But because a stranded whale decomposes so quickly on a beach, particularly in the tropics, there had never been an evidence trail. So the Navy had always been in denial about it, and it wasn't until Ken Balcomb had the wherewithal to not only call the Navy and say something's going on here and you got to get people down here to investigate, but then he went out and cut off the heads of dead whales on the beach and hauled them into a deep freeze and literally froze this evidence trail that that Joel Reynolds was able to take all the way to the Supreme Court indirectly.
That evidence trail was something that posed its own set of problems. They went into deep freeze, but they had to get them without them decomposing to someone who could actually take a look at them.
It's one of my favorite scenes, because so they're down there and the Navy sends their top coroner. There are these whale pathologists who go around when there are strandings and cut into them with chainsaws or whatever, depending on the size of the whale, and they're looking for the ear bones, because that's the not the smoking gun, but that's where you can tell, that's the forensically significant evidence, is what's going on inside the bulla of the ear and also in the brain. So she came, this woman, Darlene Ketton, who's the ace pathologist, and she's a wonderful character. And then she went back to Harvard Medical School, where she had a joint appointment along with Woods Hole Oceanographic, and she said, we had to do paperwork to get the heads into the country, out of Bahamas. She said, bring them back to me and I'll do a CT scan, because she had invented or originated this idea of doing electronic or digital dissection. So rather than cutting up a big whale head, you put it through a CT scanner and you can see everything you need to see before you cut it up. So he had to get these whale heads, which are enormous, I mean, these are not the biggest whales in the world, but they're plenty big. These frozen whale heads, which he into a carton and gaffer taped them up and onto a small plane to Miami Airport and onto a commercial plane and into Boston and then to Harvard Medical School, and before they thawed out, and it was like kind of a Keystone Cops day chase, he and his wife, and then the moment of truth was sitting there. He hung in there with her while she put him through the CT scanner, and sure enough, you could see the blood pooling on both sides of the brain, and as clear as day, and that was kind of game up in terms of the evidence. And then of course he'd given up the heads, and that's where it gets interesting.
When he went out and called out the Navy for the first time, why was she upset about that?
Well, this is really in some ways the heart of the story for me, or where I came to see as the heart of the story. It's not fundamentally a legal story, but it's really a battle. The War of the Whales is as much as anything a war over the science, the soul of the science community that was studying these animals. Because one of the great ironies of the story that I certainly didn't know going in, and most people I don't think realize, is that the US Navy really created the discipline of marine mammal science. Nobody was studying whales, nobody cared about whales until the Navy figured out that they echolocate, that they had evolved this very sophisticated form of biosonar over tens of millions of years. And that's the technology the Navy wanted to reverse engineer for their own sonar, to find submarines, to hunt submarines in the dark ocean, the same way these whales hunt. So going back to Darlene Ketton, she was a Navy, she didn't work literally for the Navy, but all of her funding, and she's the person the Navy called. She was at Woods Hole, but she wanted to be at the top of the list, so she had a conflict. I mean, she won't see it that way, I don't think, but she was a Navy person, and she considered her investigation. And when Ken Balcomb realized that once he had delivered the heads, the Navy wanted him to go away so they could do this behind closed doors, that's when he became a reluctant whistleblower.
Mm-hmm. And Ken Balcomb and Joel Reynolds worked together for a long time on this, or at least were sharing information. Tell me about their relationship.
Well, they're an odd couple, because Ken Balcomb is, like a lot of these field researchers I hung out with, these are guys and women who just hang out on the water day after day waiting for a whale to surface they can take a picture of or videotape, or scraping a DNA sample or collecting feces in the water. I mean, there are hardcore field researchers. They're not people. I mean, they really aren't. And he is particularly, he's a real maverick, and he's not political, doesn't work well in groups. And so he was this odd couple partner with Joel Reynolds, who, if you ever have met him or seen him he's a very smooth operator. He's a very smart, aggressive litigator, but he's also very politic, and he can talk to anyone, and he's very comfortable in front of the press. And so Ken Balcomb was invited to appear with him at this press conference. That's where they first met, and he was very reluctant to do that. He was, aside from the fact that he didn't want to call out the Navy, to whom he was loyal, but he also was camera shy. He wasn't a public personality, but at the end of the day, he felt he had to do that, and that's where they meet. And in the end, when Reynolds is going to court, he turns out to be his only witness. I mean, that's one of my favorite scenes, is the Navy shows up with all the admirals with their medals in the front row of the courtroom, and they're Darlene Ketton and a half dozen or a dozen other scientists who they've recruited for their studies to prove that this is a safe technology, and Reynolds just brings in Balcomb, and I won't tell the outcome, but it's a very great moment, as courtroom dramas go. I love that moment.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to tell the outcome, but in the end, the Supreme Court, it was a bit of a letdown for those people who are following the story. You wanted this triumphant victory. In the end, there was advance.
Well, I'm happy to report, because the paperback is coming out in 2 months, so I'm rewriting, it's the afterword. So just 1 week ago, NRDC prevailed in a major court case right here in California and Hawaii, which basically the judge told the Navy to go back to the drawing board, that their plans for mitigating the risks weren't going to cut it. So, this is a war of attrition, is really what it was. Continues to be. So the Supreme Court was sort of the highest court in the land, which was one of the many cases that had been called. But the battle goes on, and that's really the moral of the story. I mean, Ken Balcomb and Joel Reynolds, 20 years in, are still fighting the fight, and NRDC is too. But it's really about two individuals. Ken Balcomb wasn't affiliated with anyone, and they're still fighting, and the guys they've been fighting inside the Navy have cycled through 6 times. I mean, the Navy is still there, but the lawyers and the admirals have changed faces lots of times, but these guys are hanging in there.
And how about you? You've been involved with the story for a long time now. Did you have any idea when you started to get involved that this was going to be this epic adventure for you?
No, I told my wife it was going to be a 2-year project, 3 years at the top, and that was 7 years before it was over, and that was a year ago it was published. The really interesting thing, though, that's happened since the publication is that, to my surprise, the Navy has been reaching out to me because, to its credit, I mean, I came away from this with a lot of respect for the Navy because I didn't know anything about the Navy. I didn't have military in my family. And a lot of the stories about the Navy and their mission, and they're by no means the villains in this story. It's really a culture clash. This war is a culture war between the Save the Whale movement and the defense forces who have their own mission. And both these forces care deeply about whales in the ocean, but they care for very different reasons. And so I didn't really in any way want to vilify the Navy because nobody's getting rich or powerful, they're just doing their job, is my view of it. But the Navy's reached out to me this year, and I've been to the Navy. I've been invited to go to the Naval Academy, where this book was assigned reading in the environmental security course at the Naval Academy in Annapolis. And just last month I was up at the Navy War College in Newport, Rhode Island, where I was invited to keynote their spring symposium on maritime power because they want to do better. They really do. I mean, they kind of want to get this fixed because they want to go back to do what they do. They don't want to be in court.
So it must be satisfying for you to see like the result of a book like this actually making a difference. I'm literally getting letters from admirals. The commander of the Pacific Fleet sent me a note yesterday saying he really liked the book and he would like to have a continuing dialogue, and that's gratifying. It's one thing to preach to the choir and get whale huggers to open their hearts again to whales on beaches, but if you get the Navy reading it and responding and listening and trying to do better, that's very gratifying. It sure is. Well, listen, it's great to meet you. Joshua Horwitz, War of the Whales, a true story, something you spent the last 7 or 8 years working on.
Yeah.
Great work and great to meet you.
Nice to be here. Thanks for
so
having
much.
me.